Wait a second. Where did it go? Do
What are
you
you
see
looking
where
for?
it is? Where is it, Sean? Where?
You will not be able to find it.
I don't see a John Willis here.
Don't. You will not find it.
Yeah, John let me know he was unable to make the show about an hour ago, guys. And we figured since we already told you we were going live, we're going to go live. So if you're here today to see John Willis, tell you to get off your butt, get up at 4:30 in the morning and work out and keep that every day while you build a better life and stop focusing on politics and start focusing on the things you can change. I'm sorry to disappoint you.
Or if you really want to see John Willis, just come see him in person in October, right?
At Self-Reliance Festival. Yes, that's right. October 5th and 6th. He can tell you that to your face. You can ask him questions and he will give you advice.
Exactly.
And then if you don't follow his advice, then he doesn't keep giving you advice. That's the way that works. But I'm on today. I'm Nicole Sauce from the Living Free in Tennessee podcast, and we usually do a Tuesday live with John Willis. I'm on today with Shawn Mills from Hack My Homestead, who is one of the off-grid gurus in our network. How's it going today, Shawn?
It is awesome. It's a nice, beautiful, sunny, solar-producing day today. We've had like a week plus of rain. So I think yesterday was the last rain, which is great. I'm getting ready to put an in-ground natural pool in the front yard, and my excavator's coming tomorrow. So I'm getting the best of both worlds. The ground's going to be a little bit soft while I'm paying the guy by the hour to dig a big hole, and then it's not going to rain for like the next week. So theoretically, by like the end of next week, I could have everything done. So I'm excited about that.
Wait, you can have an off-grid homestead and have a pool and run your pool and the pumps and the filters and all that?
Yeah, the filter is essentially going to be a gravel sand filter. So all I have to do is move water through it. And we're actually going to use air to create negative pressure in the pipes to pull water through the filter media down into the pipes. I'll be doing a ton of videos, I'm sure, on the YouTube channel. But yeah, the idea is we introduce air into the pipe that mixes with water. It creates a mixture that is less dense than water, so it rises. That creates a vacuum essentially in the pipe, which pulls the water down through the media into the pipe to replace the water that's leaving it. So basically, our filtration pump is going to be like 150 watts. Now we're going to have some bigger pumps too, because I have plenty of power here. We'll have some bigger pumps for like jets and circulation and stuff like that. I'm probably going to put a skimmer in, but in terms of the filtration, yeah, it doesn't need a whole ton of power, and it's going to be 15 to 20,000 gallons, something like that.
Well, guys, I brought Shawn on today because I thought it was time to talk off-grid stuff for those of you who are interested in that. So he can talk about solar, water treatment, water collection. He even has a really cool new project called the Prepper PC. And he's from Hack My Homestead. He just wrote some stuff in the comments there. If you have specific things you want to know about, this is your chance to get a question in. Do put the word question or something in all caps so I can see it. And if you want to talk to me about homesteading topics or roasting coffee or any of those things, we can do that. We're even willing to talk about current events. I understand there's been a lot of hullabaloo around the Olympics, and I've been staying the heck out of that discussion because it does not impact the temperature of my pool at all.
Right.
The weather does, but that does not. So I figure they're going to do what they're going to do, and it does not blow back to Tennessee anyway. So like literally zero impact.
Right.
The Ukraine thing has more impact on me than what the Olympics does.
Yeah, it's just a distraction.
Yeah. So Dean Mullis wants to know, has anybody tried freeze-dried figs? Just put some in the dehydrator. I have not.
Dehydrator or freeze dryer?
He meant freeze dryer.
Those are two different things.
If he's asking about freeze drying, I'm sure it's a freeze dryer. So I've not done figs. They have a high sugar content. And sometimes that can make freeze-dried foods do weird things. They also have seeds in there, I think.
Yeah, they do.
I don't know. A fig is like an inverted flower. So like the little pieces in there are flower petals. So it might not. I haven't had a fig in a while.
I think it does.
No, it does. It has something crunchy like seeds. So anyway, seeds tend to be more dense in your freeze dryer, so you may need to freeze dry them longer if they turn out well. The approach I would take with that is to keep the drying temperature on the lower side and let it go longer. So depending on which freeze dryer you have and which computer program you have, you can dial down when it's under pressure and frozen and really cold. You can dial down the heat that's going to do the sublimation process, which is going straight from a solid to a gas. And sometimes with higher sugar things, that's a really good idea. Now, AJ Harrison is on here from Simmerwell freeze dried bone broth. And I don't know if he's played around with figs. The reason I have not played around with figs is I do not currently have a fig tree on my property. So I'm not harvesting them, therefore I'm not freeze drying them. But if AJ, like pipe in if you have ever tried that. So, oh, he's using a dehydrator. Just wondering if they would freeze dry. Yeah.
I was gonna say I have had freeze dry or dehydrated figs before, but not freeze dried.
Yeah. They're just really high sugar, and that can have a huge impact on things for sure. So, okay. So, Shawn, one of the things that I wanted to ask you about today has to do with off-grid water. So I know everybody's going to have questions about solar, wiring their batteries, which batteries to get, how the inverter works, price of solar these days, and what that means, tax write-offs you can get, like all of that stuff.
Yep.
Those are all things we should talk about today. But last night on the final webinar series, Self-Reliance Voices, Learn from Legends, we did the Alan Booker segment on how self-reliance is your kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
Were you on that one, or did you see part of it?
I was not, and I actually missed it live too, so I'm going to have to go back and watch the replay.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you have the link. So he divided your kitchen into 12 categories, and then had everybody rank if they were a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 0 being like not prepared at all, or it's not resilient at all, and 5 being I am the ruler of all things off grid. I think if you had taken that survey, you would have scored really well in some categories for sure. Because if the power goes out, you don't care.
Right.
Yeah. If you get struck by lightning, you kind of care.
A little bit. That's happened before.
Yeah, I know. It happened to somebody else in our community. Brian from Lots got hit by lightning. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah, so he's down right now because they didn't get hit by lightning, but they think it struck too close. And they've had to replace some things, but his computer and his internet got fried in particular. And his computer arrives, I think, today or tomorrow, but getting Starlink replaced is taking 2 weeks. So they have no internet where they are because they didn't have 2 Starlinks, which I can understand why you wouldn't. But anyway, that's a whole different discussion for a different time. So yeah, Corey.
Yeah, I actually know about having to work without internet. You alluded to it earlier. That was kind of one of the reasons why I put the Prepper PC together. It was we're so reliant on just pulling the phone out or jumping on Google and getting data, and we don't bother having that information locally because it's so easily accessible. But yeah, you get a lightning strike to your Starlink router, and yeah, you don't have that access for 2 weeks.
Yeah, Derek wants to know if he had an EMP shield. He did not have an EMP shield installed, and he asked somebody about that. I think he asked Toolman Tim about it because he's at Toolman Tim's property. Would this have saved my stuff? And Toolman Tim said, well, I don't know, but if it didn't save your stuff, you would have had their insurance policy for anything that got wrecked. So
it does depend on which direction the electricity was flowing. So if he had his house grounded, right? So if he had a ground rod in,
yeah.
And I think they're in an RV right now. I don't think they've moved into the structure.
Yeah, they're in an RV for sure.
Yeah, and so if he had that grounded, a local lightning strike, and local means like within a mile of your place, you could actually get current flowing through the ground, up through your ground rod and into your systems. So if that happened and it defeated the EMP shield, then absolutely they would cover that. However, if it came from the other direction and before it got to the EMP shield, it fried the actual dish, Like the EMP shield would protect the router. But if it fried the dish, well, then that would be outside of the circle of protection.
Right. But the computer was certainly on the other side of protection.
Sure. Yeah. The computer would have been covered for sure.
Yeah. So, yeah, well, that's really interesting. And, it's funny how, we talk about EMP shields, and I have one going into my house, I think this weekend, finally. And the reason I'm doing it isn't because I'm worried about an EMP attack on my home. I am worried about how close lightning strikes to my house on the regular, and it's hit other houses on my street.
Right.
And so having that protection seems sort of important to me. And then, I keep hearing about people getting struck by lightning in our network who don't have something in, and it's sort of like the universe is saying, Nicole, get your shit together, right?
Yeah, and I wonder, I talk all the time about how the grid's resiliency is going down, and you're going to experience more outages, and you're going to experience longer outages. I saw something the other day that said that, like, since 2013, the quantity of outages in the US has gone up by like 28%, but the duration has gone up by like 48%.
Yeah.
So an hour-long, outage or a day-long outage 10 years ago is now an hour and a half or a day and a half. And so I almost wonder if there's not some correlation between that and the frequency of lightning strikes. Now, the other side of that could be it's heating up, right? Without getting into any conspiracy theories about why it's getting hotter, it is. And so there's a possibility that you're just going to have more lightning with storms because you've got the, things that create lightning when you get a thunderstorm that comes through in a hot afternoon. Like, that's just going to be part of it. So I wonder if those things aren't connected.
Yeah. So AJ says Missoula just came off 4 days of power outage after a tree storm. So he had, we heard his about whole, he spent days with a chainsaw dealing with his yard after that.
Well, and you had when Hurricane Beryl went through, so CenterPoint Energy, which is one of the co-ops in the Houston area, their people were out of power for 2 weeks, and it wasn't like the whole area was out of power like after Harvey. It was just this one provider. Their systems were down, and they had already said, hey, we're not ready for another big storm. Can we increase our rates, which will help us pay for some improvements? And the regulator said, no, you can't. So it's one of those things where it's like, we thank the regulators because they keep our prices from going up too high. But sometimes we get something like this where CenterPoint says, hey, I need to make some infrastructure improvements. And I don't have the cash to do it. I'd like to take some of that expense and take it down to the ratepayers. The regulators say no. And then the ratepayers end up not having power, because those improvements weren't done.
Yep. Big Timber says, did Wallace get hit by the same storm?
I don't know who Wallace is.
Is Wallace a place, or did he mean Willis, like John Willis?
Oh, I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either. I'm gonna do that thing. I'm assuming he meant Willis. And if that's the case, no, John just was unable to make the live stream today, and we found out about an hour and a half before. So we decided, since we'd promised we're going live, we're going to go live to talk about off-grid things with y'all. So Jenny Hill wants to know, are all electronics protected by installing an EMP shield?
Yeah, as long as the electronic device is behind the EMP shield. So what happens when you have either a lightning strike, it also happens with a coronal mass ejection, and it happens in the E3 wave of an EMP attack. What you have more voltage in the system than what's supposed to be there. And one of the things I always tell people when they're thinking about electricity is voltage is pushed and amperage is pulled. Okay, so if you connect something to a power source whose voltage is too high, that voltage will flow from, it's kind of like water pressure, okay? You can measure voltage when it's not moving. You can measure water pressure when the water's not moving. And so you need a high pressure and a low pressure area the difference between those two is essentially what you're reading. That's what voltage is. And so as soon as you close that circuit, it flows from the high voltage area to the low voltage area. And the speed at which it moves is essentially current. It's kind of a way to think about it. But if you have a power line outside your house that has 100,000 volts running through it because of whatever type of event, and it's coming over to your house, and all your appliances in your house are rated for 240 or 120 volts, what happens is, again, that high voltage just pushes its way through into your device, and it just starts, we call it letting the magic smoke out. Like the magic smoke leaves, and then your device won't turn back on anymore. And so what the EMP shield does is it puts itself in between the source of the high voltage and your panel, for example, or on the DC side, it would be in between your solar panels and your charge controller. And it basically sacrifices itself. Like it lays its life down for you and for your appliances. And so when that high voltage comes through, it actually, I believe it's nanoseconds. It might actually, like, I believe I'm pretty sure it's measured in nanoseconds how quickly it shunts that power. So it breaks the connection and shunts the power off to ground. So like I said, it sacrifices itself. It's a one-time use device. You get a lightning strike and it works. You won't be able to use it for the next lightning strike, but I'm pretty sure they'll replace them for like $50. Like if you send them the broken device.
Let's look. Yeah, keep talking.
But yeah, so that's how it works. So if I have a lightning strike and my main panel is connected and it's properly wired into my main shield or my main distribution panel, then what happens is as that voltage flows through into the actual box, the EMP shield takes it and shunts it to ground, which is why why you would have a ground rod on a radio tower, for example, is to take that voltage and take it somewhere where it's not going to damage things.
Yeah, so I love it. I hate it when I smell magic smoke, but don't know where it's coming from. But yeah, so it is $50 to replace it. It's got a 10-year limited lifetime warranty backed by a $25,000 insurance policy. I didn't actually mean for this to be a sales episode for EMP Shield, but here we are. People ask. And a $50 lifetime replacement, which is pretty awesome. And I know that at the factory, they have like this wall of fame of like all the devices that have been fried by things and kept people's stuff from being fried. They're proud of it when they get one. So, you mail it in, they get to put it on the wall of fame, and they have that as a resource to show people why you want to have it. I know all of us have coupon codes for EMP Shield, but if you want to get one, guys, you'll get $50 off if you go to empshield.com. And I think the coupon code we should use is SRF, because any commission we get from that goes to help the festival. And this seems like an appropriate place to use that particular coupon code. And I know you have one, I have one, John Willis has one. So if you guys want to benefit any of us, I'm sure John Willis is his SOE, and I don't know, what's yours, Hack My Solar or something?
HMHS.
HMSH, I'm LFTN, but use SOE. That's what it is. Hey, Alabama said, is that $50 every time it happens?
In the event that the EMP shield works and destroys itself to save your house, yes.
You send it in, you get a new one. I suspect the $25,000 lifetime insurance policy is the 10-year limit, though. That's the one thing I'm not sure about.
I'm sure that the policy would not extend past the warranty. So yeah.
So that's a 10 years of that. So
yeah.
And an EMP shield, I think they're running like $400 right now. And then you get $50 off.
There's a couple different options. Like if you do the dual DC input, so like me, I have 2 solar arrays going into one charge controller. And so for me, I have a dual unit. So it's dual 600 volt DC. That one was like 500, but it protects 2 different arrays coming in.
Yeah.
And so, they have them for the cars. They have them for, the house. They have them for solar stuff. They have them for generators. They have one it's called an RV, but really all it is like a surge protector. So it's their RV unit, but you could just plug it into the wall and use it as a surge protector.
Yes. And Hey, Alabama is still trying to like wrap his head around the the warranty $50 replacement. So if I have one replaced and it happens a second or third time, it's still $50.
Yep. Yeah.
My
Basically,
understanding of reading this, but I would also say go to empshield.com and read their warranty, which you can do.
yeah, when you get the new device, the warranty resets.
Yeah, so it's $50 lifetime replacement.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I mean, they stand by their product for sure. I think it's the best device for that this kind of protection on the market that I can find.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you've found, I'm sure you haven't found anything else, or you'd be telling us about it.
There's a couple other things, but none of those other things are backed by a $25,000 insurance policy. And so I'd rather pay a little bit more for the insurance. Yeah, Siemens has a unit that's very good. It's actually the unit that I would recommend in designs before I learned about EMP Shield. You can do other things with ferrites and shunts and things like that, but for household protection, I like the EMP Shield just because it is what it is. It's been tested the way it's been tested, and the insurance policy.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, so back to the Wallace, Idaho, west of Missoula. So apparently I don't know my geography well enough. And the only way I could answer the question of if it was hit too would be if AJ would answer that, because he knows about that better than I do. Okay, so back to what I wanted to originally ask you, because we went off on a whole lightning. It was like the lightning round.
The lightning round.
We had the lightning round. One of the areas in the Self-Reliant Kitchen was water. And he talked about, are you drinking your water out of plastic, which I totally am. Like you get hit for that because he considers plastic a toxin, and I agree, but I still drink water out of it by choice. But he also talked about, if your power goes out, can you still get water? If your city water stops, can you still get water? So tell us some of the things you've done at your place to get water, because you didn't have the luxury of running a pipe down to the road and just hooking into city water.
Yeah, so we've got a couple different systems here. Our primary system is a rainwater collection system. So we have about a 900 square foot roof that's a carport. We collect all the rainwater from that and put it into a 1,500 gallon tank. We allow that tank to settle. And so what happens when, anytime you have rainfall, obviously the rain's going to pick stuff up. There's going to be stuff on your roof that's going to make it into your tank. We have a couple different filtration systems before the tank, but there's always going to be some stuff that gets in there. So if you let it settle, what happens is that the things that are heavier than water settle to the bottom. The things that are lighter than water float to the top. And then about 4 inches up from the bottom of the tank is where we actually pull water, and that goes into an IBC tote. And the IBC tote, we used to have 2 of them, but there wasn't really any reason to have 2 of them. So we just took one out, and I used that in my aquaponics system. But the IBC tote is essentially where the water gets pumped into the house. And so from there, I have just a regular small, like shallow well pump. It is connected to an air bladder pressure tank. And then the rest of the plumbing in the house is just like a standard house. We've got a couple sediment filters, and we also have a Berkey water filter. So anything that any drinking water or like water that we put through the soda stream is going through the Berkey first. And we also have a deep well. So we've got a well. My pump sits about 280 feet below grade, which is actually below the low water mark of the Tennessee River, which is 3 miles away from me. So theoretically, that should never go dry. And in the event that we have a drought, I can use my off-grid systems to pump water into my settling tank, and then the rest of the system works normally. My little small pump that I use to pressurize the house, that'll work off of a 1,000-watt generator. So I have like 4 generators, and any of them, including the smallest one, will actually run that pump. As a matter of fact, I can even take a little small 12-volt battery and hook an old 2,000-watt inverter to it, and that'll run that pump. So even if my main house system is down, I can still pressurize the water in the house. Now, in addition to that, we don't have running water on our property, but we have running water on the easement for the property. So if I drive down to the bottom of my driveway, I can actually get it's essentially runoff, right? It's a little small creek in a residential area. So, that water is probably my dirtiest option that I have. But if I had to get water, I've got that option. I am 3 miles from the Tennessee River, so I've got that option. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we're getting ready to put in another, 15 to 20,000 gallon water storage tank in the form of a natural swimming pool in the front yard. And that'll actually collect all the rainwater off the house, which we used to use the rainwater for the house in the house. Now we use the rainwater off of the carport for the house. So we've got all this excess water during a rainstorm that's going to end up in the pond.
Yeah, and then you have another on-site storage for water, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, and one of the things, I obviously it's more for recreation than anything else, but it's not lost on me that those pumps that are going to be in there for recirculating have high enough flow rates where I could use them to put a house fire out if I needed to.
Oh, and that's nice.
Yeah.
Now, so when I hear you say all that, and I think about the way my grandma lived 100 years ago, right? Which is when she was a little girl growing up. How many things that you've put in place do you think already existed conceptually back then? Like, how much do you go back and look at how people handled water in the past and then put that into what you're doing now with sort of we have new tools in a modern environment?
Sure. Well, the biggest one is just collecting the water that falls free out of the sky and then storing it in a place. Right. So I've been to some of the state parks here in Tennessee that have old homestead sites on them, and you'll find like a brick lined cistern in the ground. And it's like, oh, they took their roof water and they routed it into this in-ground cistern. And sometimes the house was actually built around that. And then sometimes it was next to the house. So I would say that before, some of the modern technologies that we have, you wouldn't have built a house up here at the top of the hill where my house is, right?
Right.
Did you lose me for a sec?
Just for a second, not long enough. I didn't get a chance to explain people that sometimes you
yeah, I'm off grid on Starlink. Like, we're all the way off grid. There's no wires up here at all, guys. So occasionally I will drop out when there's a Starlink thing. But yeah, so the rainwater catching and harvesting it and keeping it local right there next to where we're going to use it. That's the biggest thing. I've walked around my property and I know where the seasonal creeks are. So in the event that I had, a real big problem, I could dam some of those up, and that would give me another opportunity, for storing water. My neighbor put in a 1/2 acre pond that's less than a 1/4 mile walk from my front door, so I don't dam up my hollers. I let all the water flow from my holler down into his pond, and I know I can go down there anytime I need to. But yeah, those are the type of things. Rainwater is going to be slightly acidic. So, that's something. It's also going to be soft. And I've heard people complain before about soft water. Like, you don't feel like the soap gets to wash off of you. I guess whatever I use, I don't have that problem.
Yeah.
But I have heard people say that soft water, like, you feel slick.
It can feel slimy. And you actually, what happens when you use soft water on your skin is that it sort of feels that way. But that's not so much the issue. And over time, your skin gets better. Like it has, because I had a water softener in Nashville, and it was like, okay, that feels weird, but then my skin felt great within about 2 weeks.
Right. Right.
Well, and I look at places like Hellbrunn Palace, which is in Salzburg, Austria, has a 400-year-old water system where they use the water pressure gravity fed to mechanically run things.
Mm-hmm.
And you can go check it out, and they have like this whole show that happens with water. So I feel like some of the things we're doing now, when we're going back to the off-grid water, the technology for that is 400 years ago.
Right.
To look at how things were done, or maybe even go back to ancient Rome.
Probably older than that. Yeah. You could go back and look at some of the way that the aqueducts were built with, they understood what a siphon was. And so you actually have water falling down into a canyon and being sucked up the other side through the siphon effect.
Yeah. Sounds like a ram pump.
Yeah, very similar. Yeah. So we don't have a ram pump here, but well, I'll rephrase that. I have a ram pump. I don't have a water
You
source
don't have
that
it
I can
installed?
utilize. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to put one in at Tim Cook's place this fall. He's going to build a little dam and have a ram pump to pump water up to his cabin. So that'll be a neat little project.
Oh, that sounds fun. Jen says Davy Crockett State Park in Tennessee has a water wheel. They used to run at Gristmill until it flooded, and they have some interesting water usage concepts. It's fun to look at the old things and bring them forward, because a lot of these problems that some of us spend too much time thinking about have already been solved well before we were even here. Like, even if you think about gravity feeding, right? If you want to flush a toilet and you have a tank in your attic with water in it, and you just pull a chain, water falls and it flushes the toilet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you don't have a way to get water there is a way to get water there with your arms and some buckets.
Right.
And that's something that, in the worst case scenario, if you didn't have anything else in place, there is that you can carry water.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, so then let's talk about the other side of off-grid water. What happens after you use the water?
Yeah, so most people are pretty comfortable with, rainwater catchment, or, even ram pumps, things like that. Where they start to get a little bit more concerned is when we start talking about gray water and black water. So wastewater is broken up into two categories. Black water is essentially toilet water. Now, some people will throw sink and even shower water into that because of the possibility of having fecal particulates or food particulates in those things. But by and large, it's like the black water is the toilet water and then everything else is gray water. And that's kind of the way I think about it. I feel like, anything that's going to come through in the shower water is going to be so diluted by all of that shower water that it's not that big of an issue. And so the first thing we want to do when we're thinking about that is we want to split those two things up, because you need different types of filtration for those two different things. For a gray water system, you can literally use, reed beds, gravel, sand, look at the edge of a pond, right? So the way that the water is filtered when it flows into a pond, all those systems work for gray water. For black water, you have to get a little bit more involved. In both of these situations, you want to try to minimize or if possible, completely eliminate water becoming in contact with air. And it's not the air that's the problem. It's that you can have things, land on the air, whether that's bugs or reptiles or whatever. You don't want a lizard swimming through your poop water and then like crawling up onto your back porch, And so trying to keep those things below the level of the grade is important. But yeah, for a black water system, even running that through like a gravel bed and then into wood chips, where you're going to have some biological activity happening in that wood chip pile to help start breaking down whatever is flowing through the gray water system. In a black water system, most people are familiar with septic tanks, okay? And the way a septic tank works is you have an initial tank that everything flows into, and similar to my settling tank for the rainwater, stuff that's lighter like grease floats up to the top, and then depending on your diet, sometimes the poo floats or sometimes it sinks, right? And so you've got an anaerobic system that's actually breaking down those solids there. You're still going to get sludge buildup that's eventually going to, build up at the bottom. And that's why they say every, 3 to 5 to 10 years, depending on your house, you want to get your septic tank pumped out. But then, below the level of the water, but above the level of the sludge, you've got a baffle, and that lets that water flow through into a secondary tank where you get more anaerobic digestion, and then that flows out into your leach field, which again, it just uses the ground. It uses all the systems that I was just describing: sand, gravel, organic matter, microbiology to break down anything that's left in the water after that. So when we think about building like an off-grid, non-septic, system for handling human waste, most people are familiar with the compost bucket method, right? So you poop in a bucket, you cover it up with sawdust, and then, you take it and you either put it into a compost pile that sits for 2 years, or, some people would just put the bucket on the lid and take it and hide it away for like 2 or 3 years. I've seen 2-year-old humanure buckets opened up and you could still read what brand of toilet paper they used. So I'm not a big fan of that method. I like flushing vermicomposting systems. Okay. So these are water-based systems. You have the water to move the solids into, the place that you want them to be, but you build essentially a dewatering tank that allows the water to flow through different levels of media and then flow out the bottom. Again, not to open air. It's flowing into a pit that's filled with wood chips and other things like that. But what happens there is you actually have the composting worms that will come up and eat, and it's a specific breed or a couple breeds of earthworms, but they will come up and they will eat the poo and the paper. You get some of that ammonia from the urine that'll actually tie up in the wood chips. And then you've also got a gravel layer at the bottom, which will eventually be colonized with nitrifying bacteria. So you have the nitrogen cycle is literally happening right there in the tank. And what we normally do with systems is we'll plant comfrey along the outer edges of what we call the green filter, which is where the effluent goes when it exits the tank. Because comfrey is a great indicator of low nitrogen. So you plant your comfrey and it's going to go gangbusters at first while the biology in the tank is starting to work. And then when your comfrey starts turning yellow, you're like, oh, okay. All the nitrogen is now getting bound up in the system. Okay. So that's kind of how you construct one of those. You go gravel, wood chips, and then you build like a lattice work of twigs, which prevents the poo and the paper from, clumping up and becoming anaerobic. The worms do their work. The other microbes do their work. And then typically what you do is you have 2 of those bins set up. So you'll use one for like 4 months. Then you'll just rotate your sewer pipe over into the second one and let the worms work in bin A for 4 months. And when you come back 4 months later, before you move the pipe back over, you can actually go in and harvest the worm castings. They'll be right at the top layer of the wood chips. Then you can see, do I need to add any twigs or do I need to add any wood chips? Typically in a system like that that's getting rotated once every 4 months, every 2 years, you're going to have to add wood chips. And outside of that, as long as the system is healthy and you're not putting anything in there that's not supposed to go in there, it's pretty much a sustaining system. Now, the water flowing through the system is important because you want to keep the proper, moisture levels for the worms, and the drain prevents it from becoming too moist in there. But if you don't have enough water flowing through that system, then what can happen is you'll end up with black soldier fly larvae that'll move in and they'll do the same job. It just smells way worse when they're doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you and I have talked about putting a vermicomposting system in here for my outdoor event toilets just because it's easier than everybody doing the bucket method. And the challenge there is we get all the poop at one time.
Yep.
And then we don't get any poop or any use really. So
right. Yeah, it'd be like taking a tractor trailer load of grain and dumping it in a field next to your cows once a year and then wondering why your cows starve to death.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm not sure that's the right solution, but I do love the idea of that. Hey, Hardway Alaska says, on Earth ships, they use the gray water in the garden. Do they filter it before it goes there? I don't know what they do, but what would you do?
Yeah, well, I'll answer the question first. So yeah, and I learned a lot about gray water management from looking at what Earthship construction was doing, what was working, what wasn't. You have a lot of people that will show you the system, but they won't show you about the 8 times that it failed before they actually got it to work properly. And so luckily I was actually able to work with some people on a solar deal who were Earth shippers, and I was able to kind of pick their brain on gray water management. So yeah, what happens is they absolutely filter the water. What happens if they've got sink water going in with it, then what they will normally do is they'll have a grease trap. That'll be the first place the water goes. And realistically, the construction is just like the first container in a septic tank. Okay, you've got a solid separator. Essentially, solids go to the bottom, floaties float, and then about halfway up, a lot of times you'll have like a 90-degree PVC, so that as the water level rises, it goes out without allowing the grease to go out. Okay, and so that's like the first thing, and then they'll go in. And again, how often they have to clean the grease trap just depends on their diet and like what they're doing with their stuff. But they'll go in and they'll take that grease out, and they'll get tossed right into their standard compost pile. And they'll let the composting pile handle that. But yeah, from there, it almost always goes into a gravel bed that's planted with reeds. The reeds are specific to, realistically the amount of sunlight they're getting in that area, because you've got reeds that'll grow in the shade, reeds that'll grow in full sun, and everything in between. And so once it goes through the reed bed, at that point, the idea is that it's clean enough to actually use in the garden. Now, again, they're normally very careful about keeping the high water level below the high soil level. So just like the other systems I talked about earlier, they don't want that gray water to have earth or rather air contact. They want it to be below the surface. Now, that's not to say you don't want oxygen. You want oxygen in the system. One of the things that I was told is that oxygen will what's that process that oxygen does? Oxidize? Yeah, that's it. So it will actually oxidize a lot of the additives that are in things like your detergents, and so that it helps those break down faster. And so a good root system, that's one of the things that reeds do, is they'll kind of pump that oxygen down into the muck, so to speak. And so what that does is it helps oxidize those additives. Then you have the nitrogen cycle that's happening, and then boom, you go right into watering your garden.
I was thinking vermicomposting like system could be used here if we integrate the buckets with it. So you can store the buckets and then over time add them rather than add them all at once.
It would be a manual moisture process that you'd have to manage.
Yeah.
But as long as you did that, then that would work. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the way we're handling. So another way to handle waste, which is not waste water, is a composting toilet system, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what we're doing now, so how we had it, where it was like once a year we go from a pallet-based compost pile to another pallet-based compost pile. And when it's composted for 2 years, we use that places that are not the vegetable garden here. What we have going now, and I got this from a guy I talked to who does it in Idaho, is a plastic blue barrel, food grade, right? One of those.
Yep.
With the bottom cut out is in my orchard. And It has up the middle a pipe for some aeration, and we're just putting it straight in that barrel. And we leave the top off so it can get rainwater. I would consider capping it if I needed to keep the moisture in there, but you know how the rain cycle's been here, right?
Yeah.
It's not been a drying out problem. And that has been the lowest smell solution for us ever at this point. And I think maybe for the spring workshop, we'll need a couple of those set up with lids so that we can cap them, because part of it is that we empty a bucket maybe once a week, sometimes twice a week out of the outhouses with the hip campers that come here. And that's working great. And what you can do is once you've decided that barrel's full is you just let it go. Same thing for 2 years. And then you pick up the barrel and the compost is where you want it. Like it's right there by the trees that it needs to fertilize. So yeah.
Trees are what most people will do with the effluent coming off the back end of both a gray water and a black water system. Just because you don't have to worry about if you did have any, coliform bacteria or anything like that, like it's not going to get on lettuces or sweet potatoes or whatever like that. It's going to get into that biological system, which is going to work the way it's supposed to work, just like a regular septic leach field would. The only difference is you want root growth in that system.
Right. And it's not going to mess you up if you get root growth in that system, which is great. Paul Wheaton's willow feeder. Yep, I've seen his system. He actually caps the compost and puts it up. I've actually seen the storage area where that is. And that is what's cool about his system is it's 55-gallon drums that they can lift up with a tractor and just move.
Yep.
Mine are, it's a more, well, I'm just a smaller scale. That's the deal is it does not make sense for me to have something that big except for 3 days a year.
Right.
And then we just deal with it. We just change buckets more of those 3 days a year. So, so that's the situation.
How many buckets are y'all going through at a workshop?
That's a great question. I would say 4 to 6 per outhouse per day. Well, okay. The high traffic outhouse is 4 to 6. The lower traffic outhouse is 2. And the one over at base camp is probably 1 a day unless we have a high day or a lot of campers over there. So, but the one, like the one everybody uses, 4 to 6, which is not terrible. It takes almost no time to deal with it. And by next workshop, I'll have more of those. I'll have different setups for the compost, so it won't be like walk all the way across the property with the bucket in your hand sort of thing. And the other thing you do is we'll cap them and not dump them.
Yeah.
And then dump them when everybody's gone, just because it's faster and easier.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And there's also, people have probably seen what they call like the living machine system, where it's basically like a septic tank, but it's a managed above ground system with, airflow. You're actually pumping air in once it gets into the third bin. And so that's something that you could build out of 55-gallon drums. You could build it out of IBC totes. And so that might be another option for your workshop, is a system that just comes out during the workshop and it works for,
a minute,
2 weeks, right? During the workshop and a couple weeks after, and then goes away.
Oh, so you're saying I need to buy a skid steer?
I mean,
you're not
I got
wrong.
a small one. I love it.
Yeah.
Mine,
I was going to see
only
if you
has like a
wanted to go
38-inch
in on
wide
one.
bucket on it.
I was totally going to see if you wanted to go in on one and we just have trade it back and forth. But then I realized you already had one. So
yeah, it's a little baby, but it does the job. It does what I need it to do.
Yeah. Well, I really could use forks around here for sure. So I've been keeping my eye out for a skid steer among many other cool and expensive things I would like to have on site. So for people who are required to put septic in Tennessee, even if they have a composting toilet and they need to do that thing and they're probably going to use it, I don't know what the codes are for putting a grease trap in on your septic system in Tennessee, but I would say if you're not allowed to on residential, set it up so you can after your inspection, because the grease problem, the biggest struggle we've ever had here with my septic system is the grease problem. And there's a whole thing that happens in my kitchen where it's like wipe all the grease out of everything before you even wash it, with a paper towel and all of that, because the grease buildup is the thing that you have to get pumped. And then the septic pumpers are super unhappy about the grease, even though it happens in everybody's residential system.
Yeah.
And
it's just nasty.
Yeah.
They don't
if you have a gray water system, that does divert most of the grease potential out of there.
Yeah. So when we're going to redo our gray water system this fall. I've found a spot where I can procure cattails. And so I'm going to do a system right underneath my back porch. But we will actually have the one line that's coming from the kitchen sink will go through a pre-filter before it goes into the rest of it, just for that reason, so that I can essentially capture the grease. And then I can also have a spot where I've got a faster composting cycle that's happening, and which allows me to harvest that compost out faster. Because with like the reed beds, you might go in once every 2 years and dig all your silt out and redistribute that on your property, which is great. But for the kitchen sink, it'll have a pre-filter system that'll work a little bit faster. And it'll be a little bit more hands-on, but I think it will make the rest of the system healthier.
Yeah, and you've gotten used to the off-grid life where you realize there's a little bit every day of maintenance that has to be done versus set it and forget it, which is what people have gotten used to with all of the utilities. But then when the utilities go down, then they're screwed.
Right.
It's like you can do all your work when that utility is down, or you can, check out your. I listened to your segment the other day about making sure all your connections are still connected on your solar system, which is something I didn't know. And I have the camper, and I was like, oh, I need to do that in the camper 100%, especially after the last 2 trips where it was like, boom, on the road.
Right.
So that's a good tip. You probably told somebody, not me, to do that.
I definitely did.
Yes. So I have to remind not me to do that.
Yep.
So, okay. So we've got a couple questions here. Let's start with the well pump one. John Hendricks says, I have a 1 horsepower 230 volt well pump. I was gifted a Samsung 250 watt solar panel. Can I get an inverter and batteries to power the well pump for a short time during power outages?
You could. You'd be better off with a generator. So that pump is probably going to draw 1,800 to 2,000 watts when it kicks on.
And here we go. The NSA does not want you to know the answer to Shawn's question. So they've caused his internet to pause for just a minute while he's answering this question, which means he's going to get to answer it a second time. Big Timber says, check out the system. SB2 is gravelless leach bed pipe system for septic tanks made by Advanced Drainage Systems. Yep.
Okay.
Hey, Shawn, you get to answer that question a whole second time because the NSA cut out on you.
Yeah, so they thought, my FBI agent thought he was going to keep me quiet, but he's wrong.
Yeah, you're going to tell him that the generator's the answer. So go back to the what to the
so that pump's going to draw probably between 1,800 to 2,200 watts when you kick it on. So you're going to have an inverter that's capable of taking that surge, which means you're going to have batteries that are capable of taking that surge. A single 250 watt panel would be enough to charge that system up over time so that when you needed it for a day or two in an outage, it would work. But you're so limited then with that little bitty small system. If you have a generator, that's what I would use. If you don't have it, let me rephrase that. If you don't have a generator, get that, because they're so, as long as you maintain them, they're easy. The amount of gas, the amount of storage energy in a gallon of gas versus the amount of stored energy in an 80-pound battery, it's amazing how much more energy is in the gas. All right. So that's what I would say first. If you really want to have an off-grid solution to that, then you could use solar with a charge controller, a battery, an inverter. You're just going to want to make sure that you know what that pump draws on kick on, and that you've got a surge capacity to handle that. And I'll tell you right now, the smaller the inverter, the more lies are told about their surge capacity. I've got an inverter that's rated for 3,000 watts, and they say that it'll take up to 6,000. If I put 4,000 on it, it doesn't work. And I've tested that because I've put it on a bigger inverter, so I know exactly the number of watts it actually takes to make it run. So, it's just one of those under perfect conditions, and when it's -3 degrees outside, it'll work. Under all other conditions, you need a bigger inverter. But yeah, that's probably the easiest thing in terms of dipping your toe in, is getting the well pump or the, so I did a GSD weekend at a friend's house last weekend where we put in a $5,000 solar battery inverter backup system literally to run their pump, because when the power goes out, they don't have water.
Yeah, and that's great. What he did at my house was suggest that I pump my 79 feet of what is that, lateral distance?
Vertical.
Yeah, vertical. Listen, I'm using the wrong word. So vertical distance from where my spring comes out of the ground and where I actually need the water. to a storage tank that's above my home.
Mm-hmm.
And then gravity feed to my house and add a little pump at the house to pressurize the system. And that makes me more resilient in a power outage. And also, but we have solar now running the pump so that the power outage isn't the issue, but it's a heavy lift to go up that hill. And if we have power outage and are 100% reliant on the solar system for that and the other things it does, paired with the last 5 days of not a lot of sun, having some gravity fed is actually quite nice.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't have to use a lot of water if I know we're heading into that cycle.
Right.
So, it's the way you look at peeling off the grid is different than most people who are just thinking, how do I get my water from way down the hill to way up the hill?
Yeah.
And you're thinking, how do I make it so we get it up the hill, but also how is it more resilient once it's up the hill so that there's not as much weakness in the fact that it takes quite a punch to get it up that distance. I think it's like 73 feet we had to get it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like at my house, even if all of my electricity is out, if I've got water in my rain barrel, I can go open up a ball valve and I can get water.
Yeah.
Before I had that, when I was on the well only, if I didn't have power, I didn't have water. So yeah, that's definitely, and every place is going to have its own little small things, but anywhere that you can get water up to grade close to your house where you don't have to haul it by hand, because that's the other thing. If your well pump goes out, Nicole, like you've got to walk down the hill to get water, like you don't have. And then more importantly, once you have the extra weight of the water, you got to walk back up the hill. Right. So if the water was already stored up the hill, it just makes it that much easier.
Yeah. And that is like the not fun part of hauling water here is it's coming up a very steep hill. It's not very far. It's by no means as hard as it was probably hard for my grandma to get water when they were carrying it in buckets to the kitchen and wherever in the bathtub. But it's still, the steep thing that you go up and it takes energy. And if it doesn't take my physical energy, it takes a cart on a thing with gas.
Yeah.
Which is dumb. Also, running what it takes to run a smaller pump to pressurize my house is a completely different amount of power.
Right.
Like the solar
also
system
different
we have,
voltage.
Yeah, also. Yeah, you're right. I can go 12 volt, right?
Yep. Or even 120.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Okay, I got a solar system question from Angie, and it's, did you have to charge your system with a generator this past couple of weeks? So she's close enough to you that she noticed that the sun was not out as much as she would have liked.
Yeah. Hey, Angie, by the way. Yeah, I saw that question coming, so I decided to go pull up my app. The answer to your question is no, we did not. I'm going to, I'm going to try to just put this to the screen. It may not work, but you might be able to. It's probably not going to work.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah, I can see the graph.
So the green is what I'm producing every day, and the orange is what I'm using every day. So as you can see, all of last month, that's the whole month, other than one day, and that was probably the day it was like 96 degrees here. Other than one day, we still generated more power than we used. Now, we live off grid full time. We don't have grid backup at all. So we pay attention. So like right now, if you look over my shoulder, let's see. See this little white thing on the wall right here? That is a solar powered air conditioner. And it's on right now because the sun's out. And when the sun's not out or it goes beyond these trees over here on the other side of the house, that'll get turned off. But what that does is it helps get the humidity out, and it helps knock the temperature down and make it more comfortable in the house. Because like my house right now inside is 77 degrees. Most people are like, oh my God, I couldn't have a 77-degree house. But if I go outside for 5 minutes and come back in, I'm like, oh man, it feels so great in here, So normally in the summer, our household, we use about 17 to maybe 20 kilowatt hours a day. And our system is going to generate in the neighborhood of 24 to 26 a day. When we get those muggy, cloudy days like we've had for the last week, that's the worst possible scenario, because we still want to run the AC to make it comfortable in the house, but we don't have that regeneration. And so essentially what happens then is we'll run the air conditioners in the bedrooms for like an hour or two before bedtime, and then we'll switch to fans in the bedrooms. And so once you get the humidity out and you're used to living off grid and you get, moving air on you, it's not a problem. The only time of year that we actually have to look at running generators is January, because those are the shortest days. December and January are the shortest days, but for whatever reason, we get more cloud cover in January here than we do in December. So December, we're still typically okay. January, like this past January, we had to run the generator like 3 days in January. We have not charged the solar system or the batteries with the generator since January.
What would you do if you couldn't get gas and
Okay,
run a
get
generator?
gas.
And would you just like suffer through January?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we would probably, so it's like, there's like peaks and valleys, right? And so if I couldn't get gas, I would probably make a lot more ice on sunny, cold days. And I wouldn't have 2 freezers running. I would have more stuff on ice. Or I would can more of my meat. So we used to can all of our meat. Like I would grind up a deer and we would pressure can the deer because I didn't need refrigeration. Like right now, I have a refrigerator and a chest freezer and a stand-up freezer that are on year-round. And so I would probably peel those 2 freezers off the system. The big one outside for sure, but maybe the other one as well in the event that I had that going on. And then the other thing that we could do to load manage was, we have washed our clothes by hand and dry and hung dry them here. I prefer using the washer dryer combo that we have, but that would be something we could peel off the battery bank system if we needed to. Because the reality is, the only thing that we need the electricity for in the winter is keeping food cold and moving water. We use it for lighting and we use it for entertainment and stuff like that, but we don't have to have it for those things. And so we know the things that we could peel off the system if we needed to. Like right now, my Starlink stays connected 24/7. I wouldn't have to do that. I could unplug the router and then I could plug it back in when I needed it. Outside of January, we just don't have the problem. We have so much more production than we need. That's not a problem.
And that wasn't always the case there, right?
Yeah, for sure. We did increase both our battery and our solar. We increased the battery bank last year and we increased the solar generation this year. Actually, the same panels that you have at your place, I have here. We put 7 of them in on a ground mount where our carport is now. Like we knew it was going to go there, so I cleared the area. I built a temporary ground mount, put those panels in. So we had 7 of them going. And then, back in, I guess it was late December / early January, I put 8 more panels up there and basically doubled the size of our solar system.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, we're kind of coming close to the end of the show here. And I did want to, the one thing we haven't brought up is cost of solar and batteries and all of that stuff, because you keep your eye on the market pretty carefully, and a lot of people will say like, man, that battery's expensive, but solar panels are dirt cheap. So talk about that a little bit. And is there a scenario where it makes sense to have panels only? Because I know here, if I had a second battery in my system, we'd be way more resilient.
Right.
In fact, I keep eyeballing that battery that's in my camper. We'll talk about that offline.
Yeah. We're going to take it and put it in with your other system?
No, I'm like, is there a way to switch that? Because most of the time I don't use the camper.
Right. Yeah. So right now what's happening is you're starting to see the price of solar panels creep up. The price of new solar panels creep up a little bit. Essentially, your U.S. manufacturer said, hey, we can't compete. They went to the government and said, thank you for those tariffs from several years ago. You successfully made it more expensive for the solar customer to buy solar panels, just not enough. Can you add more tariffs so that our stuff is more competitive? Their stuff won't be more competitive, but they'll make the cheap stuff more expensive. And so that's what you're seeing right now. There's been a lot of FOMO buying. So you get a lot of people that are buying up what's sitting in warehouses right now. So 3 months ago, you could get new panels at a pallet rate of about 25 cents a watt. That's up to about 35 cents a watt right now, which is still crazy cheap. It's just 30% more expensive than it was 3 years ago. So it seems expensive. But yeah, solar panels are super cheap. And there is if you're off grid, there's a case to be made for less batteries, more solar, and then you just do more stuff in the middle of the day when the solar panels are generating. And so the batteries are coming down a little bit. Like they're not coming down a lot, but they're coming down a little bit. You're starting to see solar or rather lithium iron phosphate batteries on the market for $1,200-$1,300. Those were $1,500 batteries a year ago. So those are coming down a little bit. All of your input costs for a lithium iron phosphate battery are at like historical lows. So the only reason why those battery costs haven't come down more is people are still paying. So as you see the solar panels come up in price, I think what you'll start seeing is the batteries start coming down because they still want to sell the inventory that's sitting on the ground. It's just one of those things where, well, panels are still cheap, so we could still get an extra couple $100 for the batteries. But once that dollar amount is eaten up by the solar panels becoming more expensive, I think you'll see them making it out, making it up on the battery. We had a system at one point where we essentially just used the battery as a buffer from solar DC to AC for the house, AC meaning alternating current. And the batteries wouldn't even hold a charge, but they would buffer the two things so that we could actually use it during the day. And then we would just, not have power at night. We used, oil lanterns like that. Oh, over here. There it is. It's kind of weird. There it is right there. Oil lanterns and stuff like that. Inverters, I'm not seeing a ton of price adjustment. I'm just seeing better inverters for the same price. So, a 2000 inverter 6 years ago versus a $2,000 inverter now, what does significantly more. It handles itself better. It's got less self-consumption and, more monitoring and on and on and on.
Yeah, I just looked it up. The battery I bought for the April build is $100 cheaper right now.
Yeah.
So, and that's
but the panels that I've got sitting outside here that'll eventually go on your RV cover are probably 20% more expensive than they were in April.
Right. So good thing I got those then.
Yeah.
I actually know where the cover's going now.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a whole different chapter for another time.
Yeah. Okay. Now that you've got some trees out of the way, you got a lot more options.
Well, and there's a pagoda going in, which is a perfect thing to hold up panels. So that's what I thought it was going to be, a carport, but it's more like there's a pool going in that needs a pagoda around it.
Right.
Yeah. So I thought that would work out well. Do you remember, is my cabin battery, how many amp hours is that? Is that also 100?
You have 100 amp hours at 48 volts, essentially.
Okay. So it's the same battery as in the camper.
Same capacity.
Yeah.
Same cells, basically. It's just got a different BMS and a different box.
Right. What does that mean, BMS?
Battery management system.
Okay.
So it's the little controller that makes sure all the cells are properly managed. And it's one of the things that makes the lithium iron phosphate batteries so much safer than your older, dumber batteries that can experience thermal runaway.
Okay. So if I want to add a battery to the cabin, do I add a newer battery, or does it have to match the other one?
You want to match it to the battery more importantly, you want to match it to your inverter because it's got a closed loop communication system. Because the one you have is already that same manufacturer, that's the one you would do. But yeah, basically, and I think the battery that you have in the cabin right now, I think you can get another one of those for like, I think they're like $1,100 right now, which is a couple $100 less than what you paid last year when you put it in.
Yeah. Was it just last year? Wow. It's amazing how much has changed around here in just 12 months.
Yep.
Yeah. So this weekend, I am going to do a research project. And as you know, I don't like being distracted. So I'm breaking out the AI in this. So guys,
Nice.
who knows what this is, who's on the live stream right now, besides a black Faraday bag. Speaking of EMP attacks.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you decide on something that's designed to help people get information when they don't have access to the internet? Why did you decide to put AI on that? Isn't AI gonna like ruin our lives?
Yeah. So let's talk about what AI is. So what Nicole has there is, if you go to prepperpc.com, you can get more information on that. That is a completely off-grid little mini computer. It runs off a Raspberry Pi. It's got a screen that's a touch screen. It's got a keyboard and all the other things that you need. It's got a radio antenna so you can receive radio signals. And the idea is that without a internet or a cell phone connection, you can access data. So it's got a full working version of Wikipedia, WikiHow, iFixit, Ready.gov, and on and on and on and on and on. You can get all kinds of information at prepperpc.com. But the reason for building it, there's a couple. One is, again, if you're in an area where you don't have reliable cell or internet, or you're going to an area where you don't have that, and you want to get information, we're just so used to pulling the phone out, going to Google and searching, that a lot of times we end up in a situation where we need data and we can't find it. Okay. And so one of the things that I did with the Prepper PC is I put 5 different AI models, and AI is just another word for generative text to text or text to image. Yeah, that's great. And it's a large language model. Okay. So all they do is they take a computer with a neural network and they feed it trillions of data points. Okay. And that makes the computer smarter. And through machine learning, it allows the computer to kind of understand what's happening when it's being asked the question in common, vocabulary. They're trained on a bunch of different languages, because I didn't realize this, but apparently if you learn something in multiple languages, you know it better. And so that's apparently the same goes for a computer. So a lot of people, when I talk to them about this thing, they're like, oh, AI, I don't want anything to do with that. But like literally 100% of the things that you think bad when you think AI aren't in this, because it's off grid. There's no one tracking the questions that you're asking or the answers that you're being given. There's no censoring. How many times have you gone on and searched something for Google and you know exactly what you're really looking for in terms of results, and you get something completely different, right? The shadow banning, the censoring, the algorithm is built to do 2 things. It's built to answer your question in a way that causes you to go back onto that site to ask a different question the next time, and also to provide the results that it wants to provide, right? We know that there's weights on this thing. And so the AI is like Google. Now it's definitely slower because it's not running on a warehouse full of servers. It's literally running, the whole thing is self-contained right here. And so, so the idea was, hey, let's have a way to access information. And I've been asked this question a lot, like, well, how do you update it? Why do I need to update it? If it's not connected to the internet, I don't have to patch it for security purposes. And so the only other reason why I would need to update it is if facts change, right? Well, theoretically, facts aren't going to change. So why do I need to update it? Now, there might be a new discovery or some new things that come out where we get a better understanding, and there will be ways to update that in the future in the event that that's something that people want. But for the significant majority of information that people are looking for, the facts are already baked out. And the difference is that if Google or Meta or Microsoft or anyone else decides that they want to change the information that you're getting, all they got to do is make a couple of keystrokes into the algorithm, and they can do that. I think it was the 2016 presidential election during the Democratic debates. Tulsi Gabbard had like this super great thing, and then you couldn't find her on Google. Like you went and looked at, if you looked for on Google, she actually sued Google after this because you couldn't find her fundraising page. Like they literally took it out and shadow banned her fundraising page after she smoked Kamala Harris during that debate. And so that's all they have to do. No, Kevin, the Encyclopedia of Country Living is not on there. It is not an open source document. I've got about 60.
I think one of the older editions might be, and I'll look that up for you. Because
okay.
If it is, that's a really good edition.
Yeah, if it is, there's a lot of stuff like that on there. There's thousands of PDFs. There's 60,000 books. There's a ton of stuff on there. But while it's possible that there might be something on there that's copyrighted, I tried not to.
Yeah. It was your best effort. Well, I know it's in the Google books, and I thought the Google books were.
I'll make a note of that because if it is, all the new ones that ship out will have it.
Yeah. I don't know. We'll have to see. But there was a point where you could download it for free, a digital copy through the Google Books thing. And so
this thing also comes with about 60 gigs of open space on the drive. And so if you had things like that or other ebooks that you had already ripped on a drive, you could definitely copy them on there. It ships in an EMP bag in a waterproof, crush-proof Pelican case. And so the idea there is that it's all self-contained, and in the event of some sort of EMP-like or CME-like event, all of that data is protected. It's all there, it's ready, and it's readily accessible.
Yeah, that's very cool.
I looked up a bunch of different, because I was thinking, like, what am I going to call this thing, right? So I ended up calling it the BASE, which stands for Basic Assistant for Survival and Education. But I really wanted to name it after, like, HAL or whatever they called the computer from the time machine that the guy ran into it. So I really wanted to like do one of those, but those are all copyrighted. I looked it up. I reached out to our network. So
yeah. Question. So is it exchanging Google censorship for censorship?
Yeah, no, there's no censorship other than what isn't in there. So like the Encyclopedia of Country Living.
Which would be a perfect addition, but I feel like we're in the early 90s for publishing dates, so we are not out of copyright yet on that. Because It's 50 years, isn't it?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it's 50 years. So
yeah,
it's not part of the public domain at this point, but it is in the Google library.
But this thing's not locked down at all. So you could absolutely, if you had information like that you wanted to stick on there and protect, it'd be very, very easy. There's 2 USB 3.0 ports on the front of it and an SD card on it. So or micro SD.
Yeah. Well, I really enjoyed the demo you gave me on Saturday of that, and I have not cracked it because I was focusing on the Self-Reliance Voices webinars, but I'm like, now I get to crack it this weekend and start seeing how it works, just as far as that concentration thing. People want to know how much it is.
So it's $1,000 on the website. If you can get to a place where I'm going to be in person, I sell it for $850, but $1,000 covers sales tax and shipping to anywhere in the United States. prepperpc.com is the main website. I also have a Shopify store set up for it, which is prepperpc.store. A lot of people like the checkout thing a bit more with Shopify, and so that's an option there.
Okay. Well, it looks like we have one last question from Derek. Can you recommend a website to use to search for land for a homestead?
I like landwatch.com. I have found land that I almost bought before at landwatch.com. You've got your lands of, so like lands of whatever state you're looking in. Honestly, even the sites like Zillow and Trulia and Realtor.com have a lot more raw land options. And Facebook Marketplace is another great option because a lot of times land that won't qualify for a conventional loan, like that's the only option that the people have. Like they can't put it on the MLS. And so a lot of times they'll do so. If you can go into the area that you're looking for and draw like a 50-mile radius around it, go to Facebook Marketplace and look up land for sale. A lot of times you'll find that. I've got a resource. Give me a second to try to
Here's one on Facebook. It's a group called Homestead Properties for Sale by Owner.
That's a good one.
And they've that's not, of course, the best. So I've seen some fairly decent posts. I will say that pricing wise, sometimes it's really good prices, and sometimes they know what they have and they're trying to get their orchard price as part of it or whatever. So I've been kind of haunting that, even though I don't want to move, because I've seen some. I feel like I could move to West Virginia and get some pretty good deals, but then I'd have to move to West Virginia, which is a problem.
Right.
But they have them from all over. West Coast, East Coast, Northeast. Like you'll just see them. 41 acres, 2 houses, now $600,000, right? Which is a lot of money. But if you get 2 families in, that's $300,000 a piece. And you start getting into, this is what an actual house costs anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So. And then other times you'll see land for like $20,000 done.
Yeah.
35 acres, all sorts of cool stuff. Okay, go ahead. What do you want to share?
I was just going to see if I can get this link to paste. It's saying it's failing to paste. I'm sure there's some problem with.
Send it to me on Telegram if you have Telegram on your computer.
I don't.
Okay.
So if you go to, let's see here, this is going to be kind of long, guys, but bear with me. It's actually, you know what? Hold on. Maybe I can just type it in instead of pasting it.
It says a buddy of mine inherited a couple hundred acres in West Virginia, but it's way out in the hills, as are all great homesteads.
Yep. My place is way out in the hills and I love it.
Yeah.
Products. Okay.
I wonder if I have like some sort of lockdown where you can't paste.
About to find out.
Yeah. I think also, if you know an area where you want to get a homestead, go hang out in that area and get to know people. Because sometimes things are for sale that are not for sale because they like you. So you go near there and suddenly you have a chance to buy a thing that was not listed on the MLS.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I'm going to put it in the private chat, Nicole, because it's definitely
not like you.
Yeah, it's not letting me post it. Yeah. So I wrote an ebook called The Backwoods Blueprint, which I talk about some of the steps that we went through to buy our off-grid property. And that link right there is actually, it's called a pay what you want option. So you can literally get it. You got to put your information in, but you can get it for $0. The reason why you have to put your information in is so that it doesn't get spammed. But that talks about what to look for. It talks about some of the problems that you run into with raw land. It'll talk about, how to go about going out and meeting neighbors in the area. It talks about how to remotely inspect the property if it's like across the country and you can't get there. So like, for example, I bought some land in West Texas without going and looking at it, but I knew exactly what it was going to look like when I went there. Was even able to use an Oculus to like 3D go there and like walk around the property before I ever went for the first time. But it basically talks about all the pitfalls that we ran into and then tricks that we learned over the years, looking for land, finding something that might be useful, evaluating it, and then trying to negotiate a way to buy it, including using owner financing and different options for financing the land. So go check that out.
Cool. All right. Well, let's just close out today. Tell us how people can connect with you and say whatever you want to say, and then I'll bring it home.
Yeah, so I do off grid primarily solar and water design systems. So that's what my job is. If you guys are interested in working with me on anything, I've worked with a lot of people in both of these communities. Hackmyhomestead.com. There's also a link there to all of my ebooks. So in addition to that one, I've got like 4 other ones that I've written. I did a movie on solar water pumping last year, and all of the testing results and the white paper that I published is available to buy. And I also have a link to Prepper PC on that there. So everything, all of my stuff's at hackmyhomestead.com. Every now and again, I'll post a YouTube video or a podcast, and you can find all that stuff. Just search for Hack My Homestead.
Great. And I'm Nicole Sauce from the Living Free in Tennessee podcast. I do 3 shows a week. If you want to check that out, go to livingfreeintennessee.com. And if you want to get the freshest roasted coffee, that's pretty freaking fantastic. I also roast and ship coffee at Holler Roast. But if you want to keep having discussions like this in person, the best thing you can do right now is get your early bird tickets to Self-Reliance Festival. They're available for $50, which is an all-time low price for the tickets, through the midnight on August 1st at selfreliancefestival.com. If you go to selfreliancefestival.com, you can see a lot of the sessions that we're doing. There's a really good mix of homesteading, preparedness, building your business, and live demos like making butter, of all things. Like, we have all sorts of cool stuff there. It's a great time. We have wonderful vendors. Check it out. Selfreliancefestival.com, and we will see you guys there.